Hi there, and welcome to United Reformed Church and our summer 2021 series on the fruit of the Spirit. For today, the fruit of the Spirit is gentleness. I'll ask you to be gentle with me if there happens to be any sound in the background. I've got the air conditioner on because it's just hot as blazes today, and I don't want to get too hot while I'm doing this particular work, so I hope the sound is fine. Our story for today is from the Gospel of John, from the 8th chapter, beginning with the first verse. It's set up by the fact that Jesus had just been in a confrontation with a bunch of folks about exactly who he was and whatnot, and some folks had come in a rather accusatory way to him, and Nicodemus, the same guy from John 3, had sort of tried to defend Jesus a little bit, and it's right on the heels of that this story comes up. It may not fit exactly in the Gospel of John, but it certainly is a gospel-sounding story, and so we're going with it. John 8, 1 to 11. Jesus' accusers had gone to their own homes. Jesus went to the Mount of Olives. Early in the morning, he came again to the temple. All the people came to him, and he sat down and began to teach them. The scribes and the Pharisees brought a woman who had been caught in adultery, and making her stand before all of them, they said to him, "Teacher, this woman was caught in the very act of committing adultery. Now in the law, Moses commanded us to stone such women. What do you say?" They said this to test him, so that they might have some charge to bring against him. Jesus bent down and wrote with his finger on the ground. They kept on questioning him. So he straightened up and said to them, "Let anyone among you who is without sin be the first one to cast a stone against her." And once again he bent down and wrote on the ground. When they heard it, they went away one by one, beginning with the elders, and Jesus was left standing with the woman before him. Jesus straightened up and said to her, "Woman, where are they? Has no one condemned you?" She said, "No one, sir." Jesus said, "Neither do I condemn you. Go your way, and from now on, do not sin again." That's the story. Let's see what we make of it, why it's a story about gentleness. I think it's a story about gentleness because when God is at work in us, we become more gentle in our interactions with others. Hard to disagree with that, isn't it? I mean, we could all stand to have our rough edges burnished off a little bit. We could all do better at holding back our tongues when we're tempted to lash out. Sometimes we're more like prickly pears than soothing aloes. So yeah, gentle, it's a good thing. But the word that Paul uses for gentleness in his letter to the Galatians, the word there is a particular word. It has a peculiar context to it. It is about being decent and kind, but in a certain sort of way. According to the Theological Dictionary of the New Testament, gentleness here means that it's a gift that enables the Christian to correct an erring brother without arrogance, impatience, or anger. Do you hear that? That's a strange context, isn't it? That God's gentleness in us is given specifically so that we can be present to others when they are making a mess of their lives. And probably making something of a mess of ours too. Now, surely you don't know anybody like that, do you? You've never dealt with anybody who smoked way too much weed or way too many cigarettes or who drank too much booze or downed more Prozacs for that matter, or just, for that matter, gulped down food by the pound. You know, you've never known people who make one unhealthy choice after another, have you? You've never met anyone who's swallowed a whole set of values that are bound to disappoint whether it's worshiping the almighty dollar or holding on to power with the fellowship of bros, or taking the bait of some crazy, ridiculous conspiracy theory, taking the bait and swallowing it hook, line, and sinker, and then demanding that you better listen to it too, because if you don't, you're just one of those sheeple. You don't know anyone who complains about why their life isn't turning out well for them, but then they go ahead and do everything that undercuts their success. You don't know anyone like that, do you? You know at least one person in at least one of those categories. We all do, and frankly, as the old Pogo comic says, we have met the enemy and he is us. We do those things too. So how do you act as Christ in a situation like that? How do we be present? Let's look at the story and see how Christ was present in a situation like that. A woman may or may not have been caught in adultery. We don't know what actually happened. We only know that this woman, and incidentally, no man, this woman was dragged in front of Jesus, and it was said to him, this woman was caught in adultery. And they didn't say, we caught this woman, we saw her with our own eyes. No. Somebody told somebody, and here we are. At the beginning of the story, there's this detail. Jesus comes down from the Mount of Olives to Jerusalem. That's a big and important detail, because the prophet Zechariah had said that when the Lord comes to set everything right, God would come from the Mount of Olives. And here's Jesus coming from the Mount of Olives. That's the where of it. As to the how of it, the prophet Isaiah had long ago said that the servant of the Lord, the one who would come to redeem Israel, he would not cry or lift up his voice or make it heard in the street. A bruised reed he will not break, a dimly burning wick he will not quench. And here's Jesus, not crying, not lifting up his voice, but drawing with his finger in the sand. Now, as to the could have been of it, you heard what was said at the beginning. The law of Moses tells us we ought to stone her. The accepted solution to correcting this behavior? Violence, brutality, breaking the bruised reed, drowning the smoldering wick. Jesus doesn't do any of that. Jesus doesn't fall for it. He draws with his finger in the sand. You hear where the story's gone so far? This woman is brought to Jesus supposedly in need of correction, and the way of God is to come alongside her, quietly, firmly, yes, but gently, without violence, without arrogance, impatience, or anger. Jesus chooses gentleness. Now, practically speaking, where does that leave us? What do we do when we want to be a good person, a friend, the kind of person who helps somebody else get out of the mess they've made? Well, let me offer you a few possibilities. You could try to make an impression on them, I suppose, like the way a newly sharpened pencil makes an impression on a piece of paper. You could kind of call them out, jab at them, harshly, severely, maybe even break the skin. You know, yeah, you knucklehead, you're making your own problems. What the hell's wrong with you? I suppose you could go there if you wanted to. And it might feel a little bit satisfying. You got that anger off your chest. Now, you probably leave some kind of mark on them, but it'll likely be the last mark you'll ever leave, because people don't like to be treated that way. They'll just write you off, and then you will have sacrificed any possibility of helping. Here's a second alternative. I can't show you firsthand, but you could be like a tattoo needle. You know, they make thousands of little impressions and put a little ink underneath, so you could be a little bit like that. Just kind of Needle your way at them over and over and over again. Again, with little suggestions, with little hints, with little raises of the eyebrows, or rolling of the eyes, or little things that say, you don't approve. You don't approve. Things that put the ink of bad judgment under their skin and just leave a mark forever. But it just leaves a mark on the outside. Doesn't change anything on the inside. Doesn't change their motive. I guess a third option would be something like using a permanent marker on them. You put a little mark on them. There you go. This way, and the way to do that verbally is to say, "Now listen. I'm only going to say this once. I only have to say it once because it's permanent. I want to be our friend forever. But I'm going to tell you, you will never be happy doing what you're doing." Well, that'll stay with them for a while until the marker wears off. And it will wear off because even permanent markers aren't permanent. And sure enough, you've had your say, but they've shed your important little word. And they didn't change at all. And you're forever frustrated about it. The way of Jesus is not the way of the pencil or the tattoo needle or the permanent marker. The way of Jesus, the way of God, the way that doesn't deal in shame or accusation. In fact, the way of the cross is the way that comes alongside. Isn't that what Jesus did? After the woman's accusers turn tail and run, how does Jesus approach her? He asks her a question. And not just any question. He asks her really a rather sideways question. He doesn't do an investigation, doesn't crush her in an accusatory manner. He asks her, "All right, well, where are they? You came here because you were being accused of adultery." He doesn't say, "So what about this adultery business?" He says, "Where'd they go? Where'd they go?" It's sideways, you see. It doesn't seem to be on point at all, and yet it's totally relevant. It's relevant to the restoration of her spirit because he speaks to her as a person to a person, not as a prosecutor to a criminal. Has anybody condemned you? He asks. Well, you know where he's going with that. I don't condemn you. I do not condemn you. It's fair to mention that he doesn't give her a pass on her behavior. But when he goes there, he addresses her as a woman who was created by God in God's image. He doesn't treat her as a prop, not as an example of what happens when people make bad choices, not as a pawn in a political gamesmanship. He treats her and corrects her with gentleness. You're a person, young woman. Just don't do that anymore. Don't do that anymore. And she walks away changed. So here's what I'm suggesting this weekend as a practical uptake of the fruit of the Spirit being gentleness. When you think of that person who's messing up, instead of thinking, what can I tell them to get them to straighten up and stop what they're doing, how about let yourself be guided by the Spirit and think, what question can I ask them so that they can see things more clearly? What question can I ask? How can I come alongside them instead of positioning myself above them? How can I be a person to this person? Now, this isn't a technology. There's no guarantee it will work. Last I checked, nobody I know is Jesus. You're not. I'm not. But those who have been baptized into Christ are in Christ. In Him we live and move and have our being, and the Spirit is at work. The Spirit is doing God stuff in every one of us. You don't have the power to make anyone's choices for them. But the Spirit has given you the power to choose gentleness over meanness. Friends, choose gentleness. Amen. That's it for this week. Next week we'll be talking about the last of the fruit of the Spirit, and that is that the fruit of the Spirit is self-control. I'll see you then. God bless. Bye-bye.